Welcome to Democracy-ish. I'm Toure.
And I'm Danielle Moodie.
And we got a special guest this week, Adam Serwer. Say hi, Adam.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
I wanted to have Adam on after I read yet another of his brilliant pieces. They're always brilliant.
Thank you.
In The Atlantic, The Coronavirus, it's titled, The Coronavirus Was an Emergency Until Trump Found Out Who Was Dying.
Yeah.
And part of me has been wondering, is it kind of there's clearly a shift of he called it a hoax and then he was kind of worried about it for a little while, even though he was still on the nothing to see here tip. And then it was definitely like, the cure cannot be worse than the problem. We have to get back to work. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people started saying that shift happened almost the moment that we started to realize, statistically, that Black and brown people were suffering and dying from this at far greater rates than white people. And Adam's piece really nails that down in a more intelligent way than anything else I've seen. And part of it, you bring in this Charles Mills notion of the racial contract. Can you just unpack the racial contract before we get to the meat of the piece?
Yeah, so Charles Mills wrote a book called The Racial Contract, which I really highly recommend everyone read. It's just a really fascinating work of political philosophy, which has been very influential on me. But the idea is basically that a society has explicit written down rules, and then underneath those rules is a set of tacit rules that say that these rules apply in a particular way to white people that they don't apply to other people. And the general example I give of this is, for example, the Declaration of Independence, which says all men are created equal, and which is, has been interpreted by subsequent generations to mean man as humanity. All people are created equal. But at the time, when you look at the Constitution and you look at people who had basic rights, right to vote, et cetera, it really meant white men with property. So that's an example of something that is superficially universal, but actually has a sort of tacit underlying racial meaning that doesn't apply to, say, Black people in the same way that it applies to white men. And you can see that pretty much the way that works out in modern society all the time. I mean, you look at like stand your ground laws, for example. When you look at the statistics, you're much more likely to get off under a stand your ground law if you've killed a Black person. When you look at the way that police responded to Tamir Rice, they immediately shot him on sight, even though he was a 12-year-old with a toy gun. But you can have a semi-automatic rifle on your back and walk into a state legislature, quote unquote, protesting, and obviously no one's going to harm you if you're white. I mean, the terms of the racial contract, as I put it in the essay, are pretty much there for everyone to see it. But it's something that exists almost unspoken and unacknowledged. Because that's the only way you can have a society where everybody's supposed to be equal, but everybody knows that certain people are not, and you treat certain people differently based on who they are.
So do you think that there was a conscious shift in the White House? Like numbers started coming out of, Detroit and DC and New York, that Black and brown people were getting this and dying from this much faster than white people. And, do you envision like Stephen Miller, like running down the hall with a piece of paper, like, boss, like send them back to work because it's just the Negroes who are dying. We're okay. Like,
I mean, I think Stephen Miller, it has been obviously shaped by white supremacist ideology. That's not news. I mean, that's, what we've seen in his own emails that he exchanged with a young woman who worked for Breitbart, who was, in the alt-right movement and left it, and then gave a big hard drive of emails to the Southern Poverty Law Center. One of the things about the racial contract is it doesn't need you to think about it to work. You just sort of understand you are socialized to act a certain way. And I think that, it doesn't necessarily need to be the case that the White House was thinking, oh, this isn't really a problem for white people, so we don't need to worry about it. I think that when issues become racialized, people act in that way, even if they don't consciously think about it. Like there was this, in Wisconsin, you had this this state Supreme Court case over the legality of the governor's stay-at-home order. And when the government's attorney for Wisconsin, the state's attorney, was discussing how there had been an outbreak in a particular county in Wisconsin, and he mentioned that it had been in a meatpacking factory. The Chief Justice interrupted him to again repeat that it was meatpacking workers, and then she specified it was not quote unquote regular folks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe she didn't mean
she meant it.
That specifically. Maybe she didn't specifically mean Latino people who make up a disproportionate number of meatpacking workers are not regular folks. Maybe she just meant this is a high risk job. But either way, she's separating out these people who are at high risk of contracting the disease and saying they don't really count for the purposes of this law that is supposed to protect everybody. And to me, that reflects a particular calculus. It says, this emergency is only affecting certain people to the degree that it is an emergency. And so, to me, it doesn't really require an extraordinary measure, the extraordinary measures that we're taking, in order to combat the spread of the virus, particularly since it's inconveniencing me, a regular person who is not at risk in the same way. So I don't think that there's necessarily, conscious malice involved, but I do think and I think Mills, when you read his book, he's very good at like outlining how this works in different contexts and how it works throughout history. This is really an intellectual framework that underpins, the history of Western civilization. It's not something that, that just like appeared in the last 50 years or something like that. And it's not just something that happens with conservatives. I mean, you can look at New York, you look at police handing out masks in Central Park on a sunny day, and you could see them, slamming a guy to the sidewalk in East New York. So, I mean, like this is not a thing that just exists. It's not just a Republican thing. It's not just a conservative thing. It is a thing that has, underpins the way our society has been built, which is why it's a problem that persists in almost any context.
What troubles me, though, I think that when we don't call out the intentional malice, like I have recently have gone after several cable news anchors for insinuating that it's not that the Trump administration is evil, it's just that the policies that they are putting forth are not benefiting all people. And I think, much as you are a writer, as a writer, words are important and they matter, right? And so it is incredibly important, I think, to understand that you don't create policy out of the goodness of your heart. You create it at least Republicans don't create policy out of the goodness of their heart. They create it for who it's going to benefit, namely the people that are their donors and their base and what have you. But as I was reading your piece, and I don't remember and so tell me if you did mention it in there, because I don't remember if you did, but what keeps coming up for me, especially after the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, after the murder of Sean Stiller, Breonna Taylor, is the fact that white Americans don't have to abide by the fact that Black people actually have rights, like rights to exist. And what comes up for me is, in the Dred Scott decision in 1857, where they said that Black men have no rights, right, by which a white man should have to abide. And I think that presumption has been ingrained in our democracy, has been ingrained in our culture, so much so that when these white folks are out there protesting their right to go to the gym and to get a haircut,
and to go to
it's
Red
like,
Lobster.
I don't have to, and to go to Red Lobster and to go get a tattoo, apparently, in Georgia, because that's open, because that makes sense, that I don't have to care that you are dying. I don't have to care that you don't have health care. I don't have to care that you don't even make a living wage, but that your pure existence is for my betterment, right? Like, I don't have to be concerned about whether or not my right to protest as a white person, and I continue to say this, it seems to me to be about the right to oppress. It doesn't ever seem to be about the right of what liberty and justice means, two different things. And your piece stood out to me because it was like, yes, if this administration had seen that it was their base, for instance, this was attacking rural communities, it was attacking the Midwest in the way that it was attacking quote unquote blue states, their reaction would be different. So I want you to just talk about, the way that we use language and the way that opinionators like myself versus journalists who are supposed to be have objectivity, how we have these conversations, because I do think that the decisions that this administration is making is out of malice. I don't think that is like, and that is just happens to be a benefit of the policy. I think it's the point.